Alright, so here's where I am. The base part of the square structure of the house is assembled, and then I spent a little time off camera dealing with the roof because it was quite a tedious process just to figure out what the angles were. Using the model, I took my measurements and cut my 1/8 inch thick luan, but where the angle trouble came in is these little supports here. Now I want the roof to be a lot lighter because it is on the top. I don't want this big heavy weighted thing going on, and because it's meant for the cats to play in, keeping something light in structure at the top is less likely for them to get injured if they are roughhousing and somehow this thing collapses on them. So having something lightweight was really important. And that is why I went with this thin 1/8 inch thick luan. But in order to do that, I needed to give it some supports. And here's where the angle problems began. So I have some 1/2 inch square stock, and I needed to figure out, when I lay this on here, what is that angle going to be along with the 4 pieces. And I could do some complicated math problems, or I could do it my easy way, which is just to take some scrap pieces of square stock, eyeball what I think the angle was, cut it on the chop saw, and then go from there. And basically that's what I did. I guessed at an angle, chopped it, went a little bit too much, too little, and then just kept adjusting my angle until I got the exact angle that I needed. Now the other thing is that it is actually a compound angle. It's made it even worse. It's tipped in 2 different directions. Needless to say, I worked all of that out yesterday, and then I just glued on my square stock to the edges of 2 of the side pieces. Now it's going to be the 2 short sides that have this more of a blunt edge. And I'm going to wait for the street sweeper to go by. Oh, and it looks like he's doing donuts out in the street. Alright, so I now have these glued on and they're secure, and that will give me a place for the other 2 sides to get glued to once I'm ready. But the next step I'm going to be doing is applying the shingles to these flats so that I don't have to worry about it being upright. It will be much easier. And I went and picked up a new toy, which I am really happy about. I don't know why I haven't had one of these sooner. I always watch the people in those cake competitions who have this nifty cutter that cuts dowels. I finally have one of these. It's a snipper. They made by several different brands, and it has angles here to show you where you're going to cut. And this one was for molding cutting. Apparently it's a molding snipper. Listen to that rain. It sounds awesome. It is so amazing and exciting to have rain here in California. Come on, rain. Alright, so I just traced my angle, and then all you do, and there it is. I ordered basically a case of these popsicle sticks from Home Depot, and they sell these in 30 packs. They're mixers for the small quarts. They're essentially craft sticks. Okay, 30 of them for 98 cents. That's the cheapest I think I've seen them. They're not selling them there for craft purposes. I'm going to be using them though for my shingles. To begin my shingles, I really want to have a clean edge here at the bottom when this sits up. I am going to be using the rounded end of these popsicle sticks to give me that design. But to start off with, I want to have a nice firm bottom, molding here. So I'm gluing on just a straight piece. Okay, I'm going to set this aside and let that dry. And while that is drying, I can begin one that I had done a little bit earlier, which hopefully is set enough. This middle piece I'm going to save because I'm going to have some smaller shingling on the side pieces, especially the round curved part that's going on the end. I'm going to stay clear of this edge a little bit because I need to be able to sink a couple screws here. I'm going to give myself a nice clean line. This type of thing becomes very meditative, and I get lost in just the process and totally forget about dealing with leaving my lines. I'll just start in the middle. Alright, well, as you can see, this is going to be a long, tedious process to do this to 4 pieces. So I'm going to go ahead and get this going, and then once this dries, it'll be time for painting. I'm going to paint up the back sides of these, set them aside so that I can begin assembling them. I'm going to go ahead and start gluing up some of the sides. I have to be careful here because this is only an 1/8 inch thick. If I pile that head too much, it's going to blow right through the glue line. Ultimately, these screws should act like clamps while the glue is drying. So technically, I could probably remove these once the glue is dry, if the heads were getting in the way of the little molding strip that I'm going to apply. I'm going to see how it goes though, because leaving the screws in will definitely make it stronger. I got a couple issues here. I want this to have a flat so that when it sits on the top it can be detachable and have a lip. So I went and I ripped some pieces on my table saw, which is a roughly 30-degree angle, and because my angling wasn't perfect, I have this bowing here from gluing. So when I get this in here, this should pull all this out for me, lock this all into place, and then also I will have a flat border all the way around. Then I will add a small strip of square stock that will sit inside the rim, lock itself into place. So I'm gonna go ahead and get these attached on. So I have some 1/2 inch stock that I'm just going to glue to the rim, and that should be able to seat right on the inside of the lip of the top of the house. Okay, so this glue is dried. Yay! Alright. Roof's on. Alright, so my curved piece here is off of the jig, and I did a full tutorial on how to do this bend in the vacuum bag. Check out the description for that tutorial. But now I'm going to do a bit of cleanup so that I can get it ready to get prepped on here and get my shingles on. So for the cleanup, I'm just going to use my bandsaw to cut down the excess in both directions. I ripped a bevel on some excess plywood that I'm going to be gluing to the inside of this piece and get going on that cleanup. I finished trimming my bend piece here, and then I went in and put a rabbet on the opposite end so that I can go ahead and glue these two pieces. And once the glue dries, this has enough flex that I'll be able to flex it onto there, and these two 45-degree angles will seat directly against the house. I just wanted to mention about the bend that I didn't need to go crazy about cleaning it up because I'm going to be covering over this bend with siding. I'm going to be putting in a bottom piece of board and a top piece of board just to help support it, and in order to get the right shape I need to just temporarily get this affixed here so that I can just trace and then cut whatever I've traced. I think what I'm going to do is for the bottom one here where it meets down here, I'm actually going to make this more like an open view because I want to be able to dangle some cat toys in here and have them be able to, have access to it from below. And then the top one I can stabilize a little bit more. It will most likely be this shape with this little piece kind of chunked out of it. Cut out my two of them, and then I decided not to bother trying to get the little angled cut in here for it to go. If I just seat this just slightly down, I can leave it flat, and then it'll also leave me a lip to make the roof part a little detachable so that if I need to get in here and repair the toy that will be dangling from it, I can actually do that. So the next thing I'm going to do is I need to cut out that horseshoe shape. I'm going to come in and just give myself, go with 1.5 inches. I think that might be too big. Big stability. Let's go 1.25 inches. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and remove this negative space. I'm going to just do a bit of sand in here. This is going to be my bottom. It's going to be in here, positioned like that. So I can go ahead and screw all along the bottom just to get it nice and held into place. The screw heads are going to get covered with the slatting, the clapboard, but I need to make sure that I don't blow through the layers and the screw is actually doing its job and holding because it's so thin here. So I think I'm going to let this stay kind of on the surface. Alright, so it is nice and fitted. I have the two pieces here. It's now time to move on to apply the clapboard to this piece so that I can get it all painted and attached. Alright, so before I get into going crazy with the clapboard, I decided I needed to reinforce these window frames first. So I'm going to go ahead and just take some of those pieces that I've been using for the siding, glue these in place. Because I messed up that one template, I have this extra thing, and the parts that I had cut off, I already have that neat little curve, so I'll be able to go and cut a nice thick slice off of the mess up piece and then use that as the rest of the border for the top and the bottom. It's been pretty hot lately, so this should dry really quickly. Alright, I'm moving to the back side of the house now. I'm going to get this window in. If I follow the model dimensions, I'm looking at only 2 inches in depth, but I don't think that that's quite enough. See, this is, it protrudes here, but I have these really large pieces that are going to be on the opposite side, and I feel like in reality, this is going to be not weighted well enough. So I'm going to add an extra 2 inches and actually go with a 4-inch protruding bit, and then I just went in and cut a piece of what that was going to look like at 4 inches and kind of play with my angles here. Decided 1 3/4 in from each end, and I'm going to go ahead and cut these angles and start with the base first because that makes it a lot easier. Okay, so once I cut these 2 angles on the chop saw, it made it really easy to figure out what the bevels were going to be for the rest of this. It's the same angle on the chop saw, so all I had to do was take that same degree measurement and use that to cut my bevels, which for my case ended up being 24 degrees. And then that center one here also has a bevel on each end just to beat it up to there and there. I don't know if I can hold all of this. Started collapsing. Because I already have a doorway, it's not necessary for me to actually turn this into a functioning window. However, I do want to use this as an opportunity to pop something in here that is going to resemble faux stained glass, since this is a Victorian cat house. I did debate doing actual stained glass, which I have the materials for. However, since it is for animals, I don't want it to be unsafe. So I will be painting on acrylic to make it look like stained glass. I'm going to turn these pieces into a frame. I need to take out cutouts. I'm going to measure and be removing some stock in the middle, so that I can go ahead and seat some piece of plexiglass in there that's going to be painted. Before I can do any assembling of this window, I need to give myself a ledge. I'm going to go ahead, I have these square dowels. So I will be just gluing around the edges so that I can put the sheet of plexi coming in from the back. It's necessary for me to have this closed off, so I just went and chopped a couple of small bits here. I might as well just glue up this one, and basically there's enough play here that it'll hold it in place. Loving it. That's good. Alright, I'm gonna go ahead and begin making this one here, and I went ahead and numbered them just to make it a little easier so I knew what part was what. So I'm gonna head and start making part number 4. Part number 4 is gonna be here in this section of the house. So I'm looking at this guy, and I'm just gonna take some measurements off of this, and again begin with my base, because the base is the footprint of everything. I know that I need my inside to be 4.5, but I want it to be 3 inches in width. So first gonna come in and put in some 3-inch markers here. Then I'm gonna measure 4.5 in this direction. All right, I'm gonna head over to the bandsaw to try and relieve this corner first. And then I will probably, get a clean cut on these 2 sides with the chop saw, and then bandsaw this. All right, that's nice. So now I'm gonna just go ahead and basically build a box up and around this, just from taking some measurements. Looking at 8 inches in height. I think they're all pretty much 8 inches because it's the second story. I'm gonna cut 2 of these so that I end up with the top and the bottom. Now that I have my bottom template, I can go ahead and take my measurements off of this, as well as knowing that my total height is gonna be 8 inches, which means that I need 7.5 inches of sides because I cut 2, one for the top, one for the bottom. So I'm just gonna try and find as much of the scrap pieces I had left from making this thing and see what I can do as far as cutting out my pieces go. But I'm gonna make a list first of the parts that I need. These are pretty straightforward because this is essentially just a box, so I don't have to worry about any kind of bevels or anything funky going on. So I'm gonna go ahead and find what I can and cut up these parts and come back here to deal with where we're gonna put in those placements for some windows. Right, so I cut all my parts. I have, these are two sides, my top, and then what will become, the two windows. It's gonna have the thickness of plywood here as a border. So to offset that, I had to make sure that I compensated for my window cutout by giving it an extra 1/2 inch here, so that once this goes on, it all looks nice and even. For this, I'm basically gonna follow the exact same steps that I did for the 3-sided window here, this guy. Once I do all of that, cut it out and glue on those pieces, I can go ahead and assemble this thing. Both this window component as well as the more bay window component are going to be done very similarly. However, this is going to be an insanely agonizing and tedious process because every single one of these pieces have to be matched up. So for example, this one with this angle here and this little cutout seat up nicely against there. Basically, I will be spending the day doing all of this matching up and tedious cutting. I will have to go in and template out where each one's gonna fall so that it fits up nicely against the other piece of siding and has a nice transition. To help make this process go much faster, I am using my CA glue and accelerant along with my yellow glue, and what this does is the yellow glue will do the actual holding, but the CA glue will give me a temporary hold so I can continue to flip and maneuver this piece around without having to wait for one little piece to dry on. So just put a couple dots of my CA, spray on my accelerant, and then hold it on there for a couple seconds. And when the two meet, it should pretty much be an instant bond. And then the yellow glue will continue to cure while the CA glue is holding it in place. The reason why I only use it kind of sparingly is because, number one, it smells terrible, and breathing in the CA glue is probably not the best of things, but also it's fairly expensive. This little set here is about $15, and I've been having a hard time getting a hold of it. It took me like 2 months just to get this one set because of the situation right now. Alright, I think I'm going to work just this one side where there's the tedious matching up stuff, and then that side, because once those two are done, doing this side will be really quick. Throw on some clamps just to make life easier. I will be using a doweling type of situation when I apply these, so because I have a flat here and a flat here, I'm going to just drill a couple of holes and sink some dowels in, and then do exactly what I'm doing here with these clamps to actually glue it on. And that'll be the way that this gets attached. I can go ahead and apply all of my siding and not have to worry about where screws are going to be going. Just going to go ahead and continue matching these pieces. I've decided to basically stay in tune with the existing siding so that it all kind of matches up. So I have those leftover pieces of popsicle stick from after doing the roof, and I'm going to use them as the shingling for around this round bit I have to do in stages. So I just wanted to kind of map out what I was going to do, and then I'm going to get on with it. I'm going to constantly be putting on a couple at a time and rotating this thing, which I'm probably going to do most of off camera. I just wanted to show you how I'm going to get it going. Some sliding action happening. I'm going to just tape this on, let it set, and then come back and add some more. Alright, set this aside and move on to working on something else while intermittently kind of working this. Alright, well, at this point, it got really noisy for about a week straight. A bunch of people had a bunch of projects going on in the neighborhood, and all you could hear was construction noise. So I went on to just work with my headphones popped in and continue to finish up these little side components, which most of the process was actually covered in the first video. I'm just going to do a quick breeze through of what I did here. First thing I did was to go in and finish applying all of my siding, and this was a little bit of a chore because some of those pieces really had to be custom cut, but I worked all three pieces at once. It actually became a lot easier only to have to go over to the saw every couple of times because I could prep several pieces all at once, go make the cuts, and come back and then glue up the pieces I need for all three. So this made the process go a little bit faster. I mean, it was still obviously so incredibly tedious, but you know, wherever you can save time is good. After completing the three pieces, I made sure I gave it a good 24-hour set because I wanted that glue to be really good and dry before I went in with my dye. And this was just that same dye that I used for dyeing fabric. I had saved that exhausted bath that I used for the base of the house, and I continued to apply that leftover dye to these attachments. Each one took about 3 coats of different dye, so each time I would allow them to kind of dry for a good hour or so before I went in and applied the next coat. And then again, once all of that dye was applied, it had another 24 hours to fully set and dry before I came in with the stain. Because the stain is an oil-based treatment, I really needed to make sure that the water-based dye had fully dried, so that there wasn't any kind of weirdness happening when the oil-based stain went on. And again, I'm still using my sun bleached wood stain here to do the same. And once all of that wood stain was applied, it went through another process of waiting for 24 hours for that stuff to set. I did apply that wood stain to all of my white parts too because I liked the look of the aging that the wood stain provides, and it kind of just takes it from having that too shiny and new to something that feels a little bit more aged and worn in, I guess. I also went in to make sure that I painted up any parts that did not get wallpapered with that off-white cream, just to give it a nice seamless look on the inside and have, you know, more of a finished touch. Once all of my parts were dry, it was time to start assembly. So I started off with the first floor and attaching that main entranceway using some glue and some screws just to get it on there and attached. I knew that I would be covering over these spots here with some trim, so having a screw was not that big of a deal because the trim was going to cover over those spots. Once that little entryway was assembled, I moved on to applying my turret. To apply my turret, I first gave myself a guideline, pre-drilled on one side, and then flipped the piece over so that I could countersink for the drill heads. I then went and screwed the whole thing on from the inside of the piece, and this was just where that overhang was in the main wall, and I was able to just screw directly up and onto that. I also screwed the sides of the turret to the side wall and then used those little small pieces of shingling to just cover over where those screws were that I used to adhere to the wall. For the bay window component and the square window component, I used a doweling method where the dowel was going to do the work for me and hold the piece together. I put a couple little set holes with an awl, drilled my 1/4 inch hole into the plywood, and then using these little dowel set pins, you just kind of pop these little plugs into the dowel holes that you pre-drilled. And then you can position where it's going to go, and when you put on a little bit of pressure, you get a little tiny dimple of an impression hole, so you know exactly where to drill for the next part of the dowel. And then widened that little hole and then drilled into it with my 1/4 inch drill bit so that I had a good place to seat the dowel that I was going to be applying. And I just have 1/4 inch dowel that I bought at Home Depot, just marked out what I needed and cut 2 pieces of that dowel using my dovetail saw. And then I could just, pop some glue into those holes. I also made sure that I glued around the rim of my piece too, just to give it a little added protection, because I knew I would only be doweling in 2 places. But again, these components are not weight bearing, they're just kind of decorative, so these 2 little dowels would be just fine. I reinforced with some clamps to allow the glue to dry and give that whole system, a chance to really set in. This same process got repeated for the bay window on the opposite side. Alright you guys, I am gonna leave it here and we will finish off the roof in the next video. Be sure to subscribe so that you can see the rest of this house come together. Thank you for watching. Hope to see you soon.